And we are live. Welcome everybody to the Integrity webinar on the Social CEO. Well, we are running these webinars on a monthly basis. We run them, monthly every third or fourth week of the month. And I'm very excited to share today something that I've come about accidentally, but has really been a topic of interest for me, which is the role that social media plays in leadership in organisations. So the role of how a CEO being connected online can really affect a company or not, or the role that them not being online plays within an organisation. So today's webinar should be about 30 minutes long. We're so excited to see that we've got a good amount of viewers that have joined us. I know we had about 20 people sign up for the webinar, which is really great. We've doubled our numbers on last month when we launched the webinars, and we hope to continue to give you value from these webinars, giving you some practical tips and insights that are going to help you digitally. So I'm going to move quickly just to share our screen here. So today's topic, the social CEO, is going to cover two areas. Number one being why it's important to be a social CEO, and the second being how do we get there together. The hashtag for today, you've seen it post in the link in the box that's in the Hangout, is #IntegrityWebinar. You can feel free to ask questions using that hashtag. So just ask your question and then add that #IntegrityWebinar. Alternatively, if you are joining us via the Hangout, then feel free to also post a question in the tool, which you can see is on, on the top left of the Google Hangout, there's a Q&A tool that you can click on. So let's get into it. The social CEO, why it's important and how to get there. I'm a little bit on myself. So my name is Rashenda Vermeulen, and I'm the director of Integrity Agency. We're a digital marketing agency in Melbourne. We've been growing quite quickly. One of the things that I think is important to know about us when we cover a topic like this is the reason that we exist is because of a concept called digital distress. So what we know is that marketing has changed more in the last 2 years than it has in the last 50 years before that. And there's also a high correlation between digital marketing proficiency and company performance. And this gap is what is called digital distress, really, where organisations know they need to have digital capability. However, they're not really sure what that is or how to get there. So Integrity exists to help bridge that gap. So we are an audit and a strategy agency. We can, create the most appropriate strategy through analysing your data, et cetera, but we can also deliver to that, and we can deliver results and implement that for you. That's a little bit about me and Integrity. Let's get straight into the topic. So why should a CEO be on social media? Well, the most important thing to understand is that it's good for business. There are a number of studies that have come out, and actually we're going to be tweeting them via our Twitter account. If you look at #IntegrityWebinar, you'll find them. But these reports are showing that CEOs that are on social media are part of the fastest growing companies. They are more prepared for the future ahead. They have more engaged employees, and customers are more likely to buy from them, which seems a little bit strange if you think about it. How could a CEO on social media make that much sense to both customers and employees? I'm going to go through that a little bit, but I think the most important thing to remember is that this makes sense because entire industries are being disrupted by digital. So by digital, I mean the digitization and the technological advancement of their industry. Some good examples, and we've all heard them before. Xero is one of them, an accounting software package where you had very different types of accounting systems in place, or even the role of a bookkeeper in place, where now a lot of that manual work can be done by an online tool like Xero. Other areas where you can see disruption by digital could be the taxi industry. Some of you may know about Uber, which is now a private chauffeur service that was initially quite costly because they were using private chauffeurs through an app where you could order your personal chauffeur to come to you. Or the other side of that really being Airbnb, where you look at the hotel industry that's being disrupted, where people are now renting out their apartments to one another. They call this the collaborative economy, both Airbnb and in Uber, where we're buying more things from each other rather than through corporations. There are so many examples that I could give about industries being disrupted by digital, but that's not the point of today's webinar. The most important thing to know is that that disruption is something that as a business leader, you need to stay on top of. It's something that makes employees uncomfortable, and that's something that they need to be comforted on, that their leadership knows what to do in this instance. But it also means massive amount of opportunity for companies to grow and innovate, to generate more money, whether that be through donations or whether that be through meeting the needs of customers. So this digital disruption is what has put pressure or has put the emphasis on a social media, a CEO needing to be on social media. It does impact your bottom line. They're part of the reports that we're going to tweet out are talking about how 77% of customers have said that they are more likely to buy from a CEO that's on social media, which is pretty crazy to think that that would matter that much, but it really did to the survey respondents. Part of this reason is because they believe that CEO comes across as more trustworthy and accessible than one that isn't. An important thing to remember in this space is that we are doing a lot more of our own research now in making online purchasing decisions. So previously, where you may have just been making pre-internet, where you may have been making a purchasing decision based on what you see advertised or based what you're familiar with or what you know is good. Now there are so many more choices for so many more products we can buy, and we have Google at our fingertips. So the process of evaluating what we're going to buy has significantly changed the way that we purchase now. So that is that sweet spot, or that slide in for a social CEO. That if a social media CEO or a CEO on social media is active and out there and is talking with confidence, then you might be more inclined to feel that company is accessible to you, or you might have more trust in that company, especially for high-end products, for cars, legal services, credit cards, things that they're not fickle purchasing decisions like choosing toilet paper, but they're actually very involved decisions. So this CEO being on social media, it really emits transparency and a positive brand image, especially if a company has gone through some potential negative activity. It also can give a competitive edge. So if you are a CEO that's on social media, you're potentially listening to what your customers are saying to you. You're able to keep your finger on the pulse. You're able to monitor conversations. So that could be through using tools like, if you think about Twitter or even Facebook or Instagram, you can be monitoring how your customers are interacting with you on your Facebook page. You can look at the news that's relevant to your industry and how that could potentially affect you. But you can also monitor the conversations of both your employees and your customers. That what used to be very costly, intensive research to get insights on your customers is now something that is right there for you to take a look at yourself, to be able to even pipe in on those conversations if you want. And the most, I guess, seasoned CEOs on social media are ones that are active in that space. This is the one that really surprised me the most, this increased employee productivity. So as they were surveying participants in this survey, they were talking about the amount of customers and customer confidence in a social CEO, but they also looked at employees within companies. And one of the things they found very strongly is that employees would prefer to work with a CEO that is, or work for a company whose CEO is on social media. They see that that is a way of the CEO being open and transparent, and that is the kicker there, right? It's not just about having a Twitter account. It's about being accessible through that Twitter account, having actually an insight into your CEO's life. And I'm not talking about tweeting your breakfast here. I'm talking about, you know, sharing a vision for where you see your industry going, things that maybe the people within the leadership team around a social CEO would naturally know, understand, but you know, if you're part of a large company, that can be harder and harder to admit. This is also a space where staff can potentially ask questions, share company information, and have their opinions heard. That may be a bit scary. I'm not necessarily talking about you know, doing this all via Twitter in a very public space. What this is looking at is using the media itself, so social media itself, to connect with others. That means moving from having a forum where you're asking, you know, in a physical environment where you're asking your CEO to propose a vision and people can ask questions. That can be quite intimidating to put your hand up, and I guess that's not suited to everyone. That could be more suited to an extrovert than it would an introvert, and we all know that the majority of the world are not extroverts. But on the other side of that, what I'm hinting at here are internal social networks like Yammer or Slack that really can facilitate conversation. And there are some really great examples of this. There is a great CEO, I think it's Telstra's CEO or COO. It's very active in online Yammer conversations between his employees to a level where they've been bringing customer complaints into Yammer and addressing those complaints very quickly. So I think if there's one thing that you can take away from today, it is this focus on increased employee productivity, that by being connected online, you're able to retain more and more staff and be connected to them. I think that's so important in an age where in 10 years' time, I believe it's 70% of the workforce are going to be millennials. We'll also tweet out a link to that study. It's a study by Deloitte about millennials in the workplace and what matters to them. So, you know, don't just look at this from a customer and competition point of view, but really look at how does this matter to your employees. It also has pointed to social media CEOs, but they are ones that get results. So they are part of the fastest growing companies, and they are also part of companies that can really do their best to change and adapt to changing circumstances. A really good example is Peter Aceto of Tangerine Bank. It used to be ING Bank. I think they were bought out by a Canadian group and became the Tangerine Bank. They were ING being a Dutch bank initially. Now, one of the things I would like you to do is really do some stalking of Peter Aceto, because I think he's a great example of what a social CEO should look like. He sees this platform as both a way to understand exactly what his customers are saying. So he's not, you know, commissioning expensive research reports to tell him that. He's literally watching those conversations, and often he gets in those conversations, but he also uses social networks to connect with his staff. And you know, some of the things that he's done is reply to tweets on Sundays, showing that, you know, he's really using it. It's really a platform for him. And recently, the bank was, I think, awarded as the most desired bank to work for, and they have really pointed to this a lot, to the connectiveness that their CEO has with their employees. And that makes sense when you think about it. You think about when you're part of a company, you want to feel like you play a role in that company's vision and direction. You don't want to feel like you're just a cog in the machine, I guess. And that is hard to do as a company grows and grows. It is hard to maintain that kind of momentum. But social media can potentially be that shortcut. If your CEO and your leader can be more transparent to more people through using social media, it takes a lot of legwork out of those individual conversations and those one-to-one interactions. The last thing I wanted to say, and I never, on this topic of why, I never like to talk about fear, but it really is no longer a luxury anymore. It's a necessity for you as a leader to be on social. And that's not just for a CEO, that's for a COO, that's for a CMO. If you are not on social media, you really risk looking out of touch with your product, out of touch with your workforce, and definitely out of touch with the new generation of employees that are entering the workforce. It's not a sprint though. I mean, I don't want to say this in a way that should be pushing all CEOs to get on to Twitter yesterday and to be tweeting their lunch. That's the exact opposite of what I'm talking about. But really considering what is a considered approach to this, that this is a marathon, this is not a sprint. You know, if I would relate to my own experience, I've been connected online for, I guess it would be 6 years now I've been using social media. And for me, initially, it was about learning and growth and about how do we best facilitate that, or how do I best learn and grow, and I use Twitter to do that. As time went on, I've used it for different things. When I started this business, my online network was actually the main way that people knew that I was starting this business. You know, and it's something to keep at the back of your mind. If you have a dream to start your own company or to do things differently, or even to be involved in some form of charity activity where you get people on board with you, then having that social network, investing in that has value. It might not be obvious in the beginning. You know, in the beginning for me, it was just about what can I learn from my industry. I would follow people that I found really interesting, that I knew I could learn from, and I would absorb their ideas. I would read their articles, and then that eventually grew into me sharing those ideas and me sharing those articles, and that's actually where Integrity started. I started doing these thought pieces on my blog about where I saw the future of digital going, and people started asking for my services. I was working at a brand at the time and didn't really think of starting a business, and it just grew into this passion and this thing that I couldn't control anymore. So that's, I think, something that's really important to share, is that it's doing it piece by piece. And still, you know, social media is not something that professionally for my profile, even though I'm, I guess, technically a CEO, it's not something that I would spend tremendous amounts of time on. I might spend 10, 15 minutes a day maybe that on non-client related social media. But those 10 or 15 minutes are important. It's your network is that marathon, and you know, for us, we have received majority of our business through that network. We've paid little to nothing on advertising or other traditional means of getting our message out. But back to the presentation. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. How do we get started? So where to start from here? There might be some people that are on the Hangout thinking, I'm not suited for this, or I really don't want to be tweeting about my lunch. That's a myth. We don't want anybody to be tweeting about their lunch as a CEO. It's a waste of time. But the most important thing is to really determine your objectives. There may have been some things that you heard me talking about that are more interesting or more relevant to you than others. You can see some of them listed here. So if you feel like you're in a more administrative or operational role and you don't necessarily understand the customers of your organization, then maybe that's your focus. If it's to find out what your competitors are doing, you know, the social networks are a really good way of getting inside your competitor activity, especially marketing activity if you're in a marketing role. To follow real-time industry trends, I think this is so important for a leader, especially as we talk about digital disruption and the changes that can happen in people's industries. And there's really easy ways to follow different industries and trends. Is it to build your professional network or build your personal brand? Like, these are all questions that you really have to ask yourself when you're going into this next step. And depending on the outcome will depend on, or depending on your objective will depend on the approach that you take. So for instance, if it's about monitoring competition, then you're more likely to use Twitter. or following trends, you're more likely to use Twitter. If it's understanding your customers, you're more likely to choose Facebook. So most organizations have invested heavily in Facebook, and that's usually going to be the first point of call if you want to look at their marketing activity, or if you want to look at how they are relating to their customers. If you want to understand your customers, you look at your social networks. If you want to understand their customers, the same applies. Again, monitoring competition, that's going to be a spot where you can use different social networks of different competitors. And have a look at the way that they're conversing with their customers. Look at the complaints that could be coming from their customers. Look at the opportunities that are coming out of those complaints. How do they relate? How do their staff interact? There are so many things you can learn from that. Growing your own professional network. So that is really an area where LinkedIn can do wonders, but also Twitter. And growing your professional network, it really takes time. It takes describing yourself well first, so ensuring that you have a really strong profile, and then elaborating from there, and maybe it's sharing articles first that are relevant or interesting to you. And maybe as down the line, as that grows, and this really goes into your personal brand, it's looking at blogging and writing some of those opinions out there. I mean, it really depends on what do you want to do and where do you want to go. Is going back to section 1 here, if you're determining your objectives, choosing your platform has to relate to that. So if you are, a high-level CEO or in leadership or aspire to be in leadership, and you just want to understand your competitors and their competition, you're going to play more of a passive role. That's something that you can do, 5-10 minutes a day, even 10 minutes a week. That can help you get an edge in that area. But if it's about looking at what's next, if you're feeling that your business is not as competitive as it should be, that could be following some real-time industry trends. So using things like Twitter, you can follow certain hashtags like hashtag finance, hashtag construction, hashtag digital, and you can find people talking about these topics all over the world. You can build your own profile on Twitter, even with sharing those industry trends. Similar to forwarding an email, but it's as if you're doing it online with articles that you find relevant and giving your own spin. The most important thing is, even though you could be online just to follow trends, make sure that if people are asking questions of you or responding to you, make sure that you put some responses back out there and it doesn't look like a broadcast platform. But yeah, that next level is really building a personal brand. And it starts with doing things as simple as every person that you're meeting on a work day at a face-to-face level, that you are introducing yourself to them via LinkedIn afterwards. So sending them a LinkedIn request. Or once you get more comfortable with LinkedIn, then it's actually looking at Twitter, where you're sharing those ideas and potentially thereafter launching a blog. Look, the blog is probably the way that you can most cement your personal brand. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time. However, putting that much content out there, it really becomes a live resume for yourself, or a live platform for you to share your dream or to share your vision for your organization. It could be as simple as doing one blog post a month, or potentially one blog post a quarter. But then you're able to use your other networks like Twitter and LinkedIn to share that. So again, pick your objective first and then choose your platform. From there, I'm just going to give you some tips once you've made that commitment. It's just to make the time. Like as I mentioned earlier, you could spend, if it's just to monitor your industry and follow trends, you can spend 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes a week even, but make that time consistently. Don't do this once every couple of months because you really won't see the value in it. Again, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. The other thing is be yourself. And by be yourself, I mean be yourself with your name badge on. So, in the same way that when you're at an event and you have your name badge on, you're not talking as if you're a press release. You're talking as if you're a person. That's the same person that you want to be seeing online, because remember, everything is public. So, in the same way that when you're speaking at an event, you're going to be a version of yourself that, is something that isn't going to put your company in jeopardy. And you're also going to reply to questions and comments. You're not just going to orate and give a monologue approach to people's questions or to telling a bit of your story. The other thing is, if you're looking at personal brand building, it's really important to ask for support. I wouldn't suggest just to go into it and have a crack without having a considered plan in place. Any leader in any organization, whether you're a small business or a large organization, you have limited time. And doing this well, especially if we're talking about following trends, building your network and building your brand, that's going to take time. So a professional can help, whether that be in your organization, so looking at a social media manager, a digital manager, maybe even a PR person, depending on how much digital experience they have. They could be a person to ask for help and to help you create a plan and set some goals for you to get there. Or you can go external to your organization and consult with people like us or like other digital agencies. I know there are a growing number of niche organizations that are helping leaders in this area. But that way, when you work with a professional, whether it be internal or external, they are really helping you understand how to best map out your time, given that it's limited, and what that marathon looks like. And lastly, I have to say, remember your responsibility to shareholders. I know this is a bit of a no-brainer, but there have been leaders that have shared private information before their shareholders knew about that, and that's definitely what I would consider an overshare. So those are my top tips. It's just really time to get social. So we're going to go straight to questions. I think I have stayed on time, and I look forward to hearing what some of your questions are. So one of the questions that I have here are, what about other platforms like Pinterest, Google, Snapchat? Oh, it's a hard question. But what I would say, and this is going back to, this issue of time. So if you don't have much time on your hands, you want to pick the platform that's most effective for yourself, correct? So those other platforms might not be the most effective. Potentially, maybe if you are, a leader of a very young brand, a sports brand or a clothing brand, and your target market is 13 to 15, maybe Snapchat is a better choice than LinkedIn, depending on, if you're looking at working in that area altogether, or working in that industry for a while. But at this time, I wouldn't really recommend touching on those platforms just because you're limited on time and the other platforms have shown the most effectiveness. Just looking up other questions here. What if I say something wrong? That is a really good question. This is the thing that I find that most CEOs really fear is making a mistake. And the reality is you can make a mistake, but it's very unlikely that will happen, especially, if you do some planning and you have people that will help you get there and set that journey for you. They could set some parameters on things that you won't talk about or set some ways that you will talk about things. I think the most important thing to remember is that it's public. This is public. So in the same way that you would or wouldn't say things at a forum or a conference, you're not going to say them online. So keep that in mind. But if something does happen that you could not foresee, then definitely one of the first things to know is don't panic. Don't freak out. One of the biggest mistakes is to freak out and then get your PR team on this very quickly. And, you know, that's not necessarily needed. It's very normal to make mistakes. It's common to make mistakes, and people do in some ways expect that. If it's a big mistake, then it's something else. But the first thing is, you know, own up to that mistake, and don't let that fear deter you. Be genuine, really, in your approach. Like, if you know that you made a mistake and it was the wrong thing to say, and there isn't necessarily a huge risk by admitting that, then definitely own up to it. If you do feel that there's a bit of a risk in admitting the mistake that you made, just seek a professional, and that professional should help you craft your response. So, more questions. Most leaders, this is a great question from Steve. Most leaders don't get social media. They think of it as a broadcast channel. What strategies/reasons can you think of that will help them engage? That's a great question, Steve. I think that it's true. Most leaders definitely don't get it as much. One of the things that I have done within organizations to help leaders get it is actually do some social monitoring of my own. So basically, I would, in a very manual way, similar to you might hear of the PA printing emails for a CEO for him to read or her to read because they don't want, or they're not as good on email. Similar with social media. So looking at printing out some of the conversations, whether it be conversations to do with your organization, to do with your church, to do with your business, to do with your not-for-profit, and start to watch that dialogue and start really talking to them about what they're seeing and how they're observing that, and start just ask them for their interpretation of how this medium is working. The other thing that I have found quite effective is to engage them about their children, to ask them how they notice their children are using social networks, especially grandparents. They will understand it because there's actually one of the fastest growing areas for social media is that +55 because of the connectivity to grandparents. So the more you have them thinking about social media in a way that relates to their non-work life, the more I believe they begin to understand how it can look at work and become more of a two-way dialogue and less of a broadcast. Do we have any other questions? I think that's the last one in our Q&A through Google+, but I might take a look on Twitter as well. Okay, one from Kevin on time. How much time should I spend on social? It really depends on the amount of time you want to commit and the amount of time you want to spend, and again, your objective. You can't say I want to spend 5 minutes a day and I want to build my personal brand. That's going to be hard. If it's with 5 minutes a day, you'll be able to monitor what's going on in your industry. You might be able to, you know, make that friend request on LinkedIn to the people that you've met. You might be able to clean up your professional profile a little bit every day. So that would work. But I think all in all, it doesn't really matter the amount of time that you're giving it, as long as you're committing a little bit and a little piece at a time is what matters. And getting started and asking for help along the way. There's lots of people around that will help and advise you, and that will evolve in itself. People will start to see the value, or you'll start to see the value in it the more you kind of chip away at it. So I think those are all of the questions that we have for you today. Thank you so much for your time and joining us on this Hangout. Next month, we actually won't have a webinar Hangout. We will be having a live event in Melbourne on Facebook ROI. We're going to send out a link to the event after this Hangout. The event will be run by our team and also Peasy. Peasy are Facebook app developers, and they have partnered with Australia's biggest brands to develop everything from Facebook competitions to advertising campaigns that convert well. They are absolutely Facebook experts, and our team also have significant expertise in Facebook specifically to drive ROI. We know that there are a lot of people that are investing a lot of money in this channel but aren't necessarily understanding the results that they're seeing or the effectiveness of what they're doing. So what we hope with this session is to really drive home that value and help give some tangible answers that they can use effectively immediately. So look out for that event. We will be tweeting that out, and I look forward to seeing you next month at the event or online the month after that. Have a great day.